If you want to grow your business, all you have to do is get people to take action, because consistent action leads to results. And if you can get your customers results, your products and services sell themselves. But right now, most of your customers are stuck, and you're probably thinking it's because they need better information. So you create more frameworks, clearer steps, more accountability. After all, if they just understood better, they'd take action, right? Wrong. Everyone knows how to lose weight. Everyone knows if they post more content, their business makes more money. The steps have been freely available on the internet for decades. And now, AI makes that information even more accessible. So information has never been the problem. The problem is they don't do it. And the reason is because their brain is running an ancient algorithm that blocks action before it starts. And until you flip it towards action, all the tactics in the world isn't going to help. After studying thousands of creator businesses, I found that the most successful don't sell better information. They install beliefs that make action mathematically inevitable. And these are the same principles that I've discovered building million-dollar products for companies like Google and helping creators like Callaway hit six-figure months in personal profit. So in this video, I'm showing you the dopamine equation that blocks action before it starts, why a single belief can outweigh thousands of tactics, and the exact mental levers that get people to move. Once you get this dialed, you'll never have to market or sell again, because predictable transformation beats information every time. So let's dive in. So here's what completely changed the way that I think about human behavior. Right now, as you're watching this, your brain is running an ancient algorithm. It's asking one question over and over and over about everything. Will this be worth it? That's it. That's the whole game. Every time you reach for your phone, every time you hit the snooze button, every time you decide whether or not to take action on that last video you watched, your brain is crunching the numbers. This is fundamentally how our dopamine systems work. In neuroscience, it's called reward prediction. If you predict you'll get a reward, you act. If not, you don't. This is the math of motivation. So let's break this down. Every time your customer thinks about implementing your content, their brain simulates two potential futures at once. If I act, what happens? If I don't act, what happens? This is the brain's reward prediction system running in real time. But it goes deeper. Reward prediction can only be calculated in the context of a clear goal. If you're at point A and you're trying to get to point B, your brain calculates, does this action move me closer or further away from B? So it's not just what happens, but does it move me in a positive or negative direction? So it becomes four calculations. If I act, what good happens? If I act, what bad happens? If I don't act, what good happens? And if I don't act, what bad happens? And here's the critical part. Each of these four calculations are confidence weighted. If you're confident that something bad will happen, that fear can override everything else. And if you're skeptical that something good will happen, you don't move. This is why you can know all of the benefits of going to the gym, but still not go. Your brain is certain about the immediate pain, but uncertain about the long-term gain. And there's also biases built into the brain that skew the math. Things like loss aversion, immediacy, and specificity bias. A real immediate loss outweighs an imaginary long-term gain. There's a ton of other cognitive biases, but that's for another video. But in short, there are three main variables to consider for each prediction. The first is the magnitude of the prediction. How bad or how good is the outcome? The second is the immediacy of the prediction. Is that outcome going to happen now or later? The third is the confidence in that prediction, whether you're highly confident in that outcome occurring or not. And all of this is calculated in milliseconds. Picture it like two balance scales in your brain. The first scale is the action scale. What happens when I do this? The left side of the scale represents the bad things that happen, and the right side of the scale represents the good things that happen. The second scale is the inaction scale. What happens if I don't do this? Again, the left side represents the bad that happens. The right side represents the good that happens. So your brain compares how these scales tip. A clear go signal is when the action scale tips towards good and the inaction scale tips towards bad. And again, all of this is calculated in milliseconds. Your brain uses what is known as the limbic system to give you quick answers through emotions. Otherwise, you'd have to sit down and consciously weigh through all of the pros and the cons for each decision that you take. And if you had to do that while being chased by a lion, you wouldn't make it. So your brain quickly runs these calculations and spits out an emotion. And those emotions are the motivational drivers of your behavior, whether you're fearfully running away from bad or excitedly running towards good. But here's what changes everything. You can tip these scales in the favor of action, because as a reminder, these are predictions the brain makes. If you can change the underlying thinking, you can change what the prediction becomes. And if you want someone to take action, you need to increase the good for action, decrease the bad for action, increase the bad for inaction, and decrease the good for inaction. In short, you need to make each action seem as good as possible and inaction seem as bad as possible by manipulating these three variables: magnitude, immediacy, and confidence. And to help visualize these variables, we can think of them as impacting our scales, where magnitude is the size of the weight, immediacy is the density of the weight, where right now can be represented as dense lead, and far off into the future can be represented as a light feather, and confidence can be represented as the position of the weight on the scale, where if you're completely uncertain about something or 0% confident, it's at the middle, and if you're 100% confident or certain of an outcome, it's at the very end. This makes it such that weights on the very end of a scale have a much bigger impact than weights in the middle of the scale. So to pull this all together, a large, dense lead weight on the end of a scale slam their side of the scale down, whereas a small, light featherweight in the middle of the scale barely moves it at all. So let's walk through an example. Picture a consultant who just bought a content marketing course. Smart person, knows the strategy, should be posting daily, but never posts. Here's a potential configuration of what their scales might look like. The good side might have, I might get a few clients eventually, which can be represented by a large weight that's a feather because it's in the future, and it's about 20% from the center because it's low confidence. On the bad side of that same scale, you might have, everyone will judge me as a beginner. That might be represented by a huge weight because it's potential reputation damage, and that weight might be made of lead because that might happen today, and they may be certain that that might happen. So this weight might be all the way at the very end of the scale, having a pretty large impact. The final result of this calculation is that the bad outweighs the good. So the scale says, don't post. For the inaction scale, that represents, if I don't post, the good side might have, I stay safe from embarrassment. This might be a large weight because protection feels valuable. It might be made of lead because it's immediate comfort. And it might be pushed all the way to the very end because it's a very confident belief. For the bad side on this scale, we might have something like, I might miss some opportunity. This might be a small weight because it's not that big of a deal, and it's a feather because it's a vague, far-off problem. And because it's not fully certain, it might be 10% from the center. The result of this scale is that the good outweighs the bad. So the scale says yes to inaction. So after calibrating both scales, how does your brain decide? Well, it looks at how each scale tips. There are generally 4 states. The first 2 are clear signals. The first state is when the action scale tips yes and the inaction scale tips no. This is an obvious go signal. The second state is when the action scale tips no and the inaction scale tips yes. This is an obvious no-go signal. In our consultant's case, on the action scale, the bad outweighs the good. That means no. And on the inaction scale, the good outweighs the bad. That means yes. The final verdict is don't post. But what happens when the signal isn't as clear? You have 2 other states. State 3 is when both scales say yes. Both action and inaction look like good options. This is the comfort trap. You could improve your life, but you're fine where you are. The result is that inaction wins by default. Your brain conserves energy unless forced to change. This is why people stay in okay jobs, okay relationships, okay health. This is where good enough kills great. State 4 is when both scales say no. When action looks bad, where the costs outweigh the benefits, and inaction also looks bad too. This is picking between the lesser of 2 evils, when all options suck and you have to make a choice. The result here is that you do the thing that's less bad. This is where the Tony Robbins quote comes from. Change happens when the pain of staying the same is greater than the pain of change. This is why people finally leave a relationship after the 10th fight, start a project at 11 p.m. right before the deadline because they're panicking, or join a gym after a health scare. They're taking action because the status quo has become more painful than the pain of doing the thing. So the key insight here is to look at all 4 calculations. If I act, what good happens? If I act, what bad happens? If I don't act, what good happens? And if I don't act, what bad happens? And each one is just a prediction, a belief about what will happen. And the good news is that beliefs can be changed. So what if you could install new beliefs that flip these calculations and tip the scales in favor of action? Well, you can, and that's what we're going to be talking about next. All right, now that you understand the 4 calculations, let me show you how to systematically tip each one in your customer's favor. Let's continue with our example. On the action scale, we have a tiny feather weight with low confidence. This represents the I might get clients someday, maybe. On the bad side, we have a massive lead boulder all the way at the very end. This represents everyone judging me today. For the inaction scale, on the good side, we have a heavy lead weight all the way at the very end. This represents immediate safety. And on the bad side, we have a small feather weight at 10% or closer to the center of confidence. This represents missing a vague opportunity. This is a clear no-go state. But here's the breakthrough. The weights are completely imaginary. Whatever is currently on the scale is because of an underlying belief about how the world works. The way I think about it, everyone carries around their own personal laws of physics. This is a rank-ordered list of beliefs that help them explain how the world works. Often, the beliefs on the list aren't grounded in truth. Or maybe they are true, but they do not serve the person in terms of taking action towards their goals. And each of these beliefs make predictions or calculations about what happens in the future. The same calculations that configure their scales. Which means that if you can change the underlying beliefs, you can change the predictions. And if you can change the predictions, you can rebalance the scales, which changes behavior. Now, physically, beliefs show up in the brain as neural pathways, which means that you can't just immediately delete beliefs because they are physically hardwired into the brain. But they're also like muscles. And just like muscles, if you don't use them, you lose them. So the tactical strategy for tipping the scales is by installing empowering beliefs that enable action and strengthening them through repetition. And someone that's an expert at this is Alex Hormozi. It's not a coincidence that he's the most influential business-focused creator on the internet. He's by far the most masterful at installing empowering beliefs or reframes that enable action. Let's take a few common beliefs that he's talked about. Volume negates luck. You cannot lose if you do not quit. The work works on you more than you work on it. If they don't have what you want, don't listen to what they say. Each of these are memorable, sticky statements that are precisely engineered to tip the scales in favor of action. Watch what happens to our scales when we apply these reframes. Volume negates luck. The reframe is that success isn't random, it's mathematical. This turns that small feather weight into a massive lead boulder, and it slides from the middle of the scale all the way to the outer edge. So this maybe someday I'll get clients turns into mathematical certainty today. Plus, on the inaction scale, the small feather that might be the missed opportunity turns into a lead boulder, because now they know they're walking away from a guaranteed win. Let's look at another. The work works on you more than you work on it. What this reframe does specifically is it pulls a vague imaginary outcome from a far-off future into the immediate present. In other words, it turns small feathers into heavy boulders, and it pushes it from the center all the way to the outer edge, because you are for sure confident that you will progress today versus some vague external outcome that you might get tomorrow. And that's just on the good side for action. This also alters the bad side for inaction, because previously you might have lost out on a vague opportunity, but now you are guaranteed to lose. So again, it shifts the weight of the cost all the way to the outer end and makes it bigger and heavier. All right, let's look at one more reframe. If they don't have what you want, don't listen to what they say. What this does is immediately addresses the cost of judgment. Previously, the cost of judgment could have been a massive lead boulder on the very end of the scale. But what this statement does is that it shrinks it. The cost of judgment is much lower when there is a smaller pool of people that can judge you. And as a matter of fact, this one does two things. Because if the people that have what you want respect you putting out content, then that's actually a bonus. So you shift a cost into a benefit, meaning you took a weight that was actively preventing action and you placed it towards the side that will actively help you take action. That is a masterful reframe. So zooming out, each of these reframes are actively recalibrating the scales to enable action. So when someone is stuck, you can use similar reframes to make action look as good as possible and inaction look as bad as possible. Often, when something finally clicks, you'll see it in their eyes. The weights will shift, the scales will flip, and they literally can't not act. Reframing will help change their physics, making action inevitable. And this inevitability builds empires. All right, so now that you understand reframes, you understand what you need to say in order to move the weights around the scale to enable action. But the problem is that anyone can make claims. The real lever is getting people to believe. It's instilling confidence. Watch what happens when you introduce a claim with low confidence. If you say something like, posting gets clients at 20% confidence, that weight is so close to the center that it barely moves anything. It has minimal leverage, so the scale just doesn't tip. But if you make the same claim at 95% confidence and push that weight all the way out to the very end, the scale just slams on that side. It's maximum leverage. So the prediction is easy. Anyone can make any claim and predict anything. This makes confidence everything. So how do you install beliefs at a high confidence? Well, there's a formula. Confidence comes from two things, the quality of data and the quality of explanations. And in science, they have a hierarchy of evidence quality. This is how the scientific community reaches a consensus about what is true and what is not true. And we can readapt a similar hierarchy for our context. So let me show you the levels. At level 1, you have empty claims. This is stuff like, posting you will get clients. You can make that claim, but if you have no data and no explanations, the confidence in that statement is pretty low, and no one's going to really believe you. The second level is personal anecdotes. This is stuff like, posting got me clients. This is a single data point, but no explanation behind why. The quality of evidence is stronger than in the previous level, but it's not that much. The third level is pattern recognition. This is something like, I've gotten clients from posting 3 times. Now you have multiple data points, and there's a pattern that's emerging. So we're increasing the confidence. The fourth level is reproducible results. I've done it 3 times, and I've helped 50 others do it too. Now you have first and third-party data. Again, you're increasing the confidence. All right, now the fifth level in the top of the pyramid is reproducible results with explanations. This is something like, I've done it 3 times, I've helped 50 others, and here's why exactly it works. This is maximum data quality and clear cause-effect logic. This breeds max confidence. So here's where it gets interesting. When Alex Hormozi drops a belief, it almost immediately lands at the very end of the scale. This is max confidence, and it has max leverage. And it's not necessarily because of the claim or the belief itself, but because of who's saying it. He starts all of his content by reminding his viewers that his portfolio companies generated $250 million in aggregate revenue last year. And he used to start off by mentioning that he crossed $100 million in net worth, which is independently verifiable. His track record is undeniable, so when he presents good explanations, people tend to believe him. Even in situations where he doesn't have strong data, like personal anecdotes that he has in his life philosophy content, is just him going through life. But people believe him because he's believable. And once someone is in your believable bucket, their level 3 statements hit like level 5. And I've actually taken this concept of believability from Ray Dalio, one of the most successful investors to ever do it. And he had to instill this concept of believability in order to make better decisions. So track record is everything. And so to zoom out, there are 2 main paths to maximum confidence. The first path is to build believability. You do this by getting the results yourself, making them verifiable, and documenting everything publicly. The second path is by borrowing believability. If you don't have it, you can use other believable people as examples. You show the data clearly and you add strong explanations. And remember, the more quality data and the better the explanations, the higher the confidence. So as a reminder, reframes are just predictions. Anyone can make them, but confidence determines if the weight moves 10% or 90% from the center. And that distance has the highest leverage impact on whether the scales tip or stay stuck. And to do that, you either have to build believability or borrow it. Either way, you want to install beliefs at maximum confidence. Because when every weight sits at max confidence, the scales don't just tip, they crash towards action. All right, you just learned why people never implement. Their dopamine scales are broken. You saw how reframes can transform their scales, and you understand that confidence is what makes reframes stick. So as a reminder, information is free. Everyone has a course. Every course has the what to do, but success isn't about information anymore. It's about transformation. And transformation only happens when someone's mental physics changes so dramatically that not taking action becomes harder than taking action. While everyone else is adding more modules, more content, more information, you'll be engineering dopamine, installing beliefs, moving weights, tipping scales, creating inevitable action. Because here's what happens next. Your customers actually implement. They get results. They tell everyone. You can charge 10 times more. Your business becomes easier, and your impact compounds. All because you stopped selling information and started engineering transformation. All right, that's it for this one. Until next time, peace.